Good afternoon and welcome to panel 3 of day 5 of Land of Hope and Dreams, a celebration of Dave Marsh's work and vision. I'm Eric Schumacher Rasmussen. I'm one of the organizers, and we are happy to be presenting yet another great discussion today, this one on music and activism, healthcare and justice. And even though Dave Marsh is best known as a music journalist, rock critic, Sirius XM radio host, he has done tremendous work in all sorts of realms, including around healthcare. And that's going to be the topic of the panel that we have coming up. Before we move on to that discussion, though, I'd once again like to thank my my fellow organizers, Alexander Shashko, Danny Alexander, Chris Buhalis, Charles Hughes, Susan Martinez, who's going to be moderating this discussion, Laura Anke, who's going to be introducing Susan, Craig Warner, and Daniel Wolf. And David Cantwell has also been part of the discussion even when he hasn't been in the meeting. So without those people, none of this would be happening. A couple of housekeeping notes. We are going to keep the chat closed, but the Q&A is open. So if you've got questions for any of our panelists, please enter them in the Q&A tab, and Danny Alexander will pose those to the panelists toward the end of the panel. We do have subtitles turned on. If you want to turn them off, please go to the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. Should be a little arrow just above it pointing upwards. Click on that arrow, click hide subtitles, and they should vanish. I'd also like to thank our partners, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Afro-American Studies Department for their help in promoting the event. A number of the speakers, including myself, are graduates or faculty members of the Afro-American Studies Department at the University of Wisconsin. And Dave's books have figured prominently in all of those classes that we've taught. The Rock Hall will also be spotlighting or playing the Spotlight Conversation with Dave Marsh and Daniel Wolf on their YouTube channel next Friday, May 14th. And all of these sessions are being streamed to our YouTube channel and are available pretty much immediately after they're done on the Land of Hope and Dreams website. We're presenting all of these for free, and that's the way it should be. And we're thrilled to be doing that. But if you're looking for a way to show your appreciation, I can't think of a better one than making a contribution to the Kristen Ann Carr Fund. The Kristen Ann Carr Fund was started by Dave Marsh and his wife, Barbara Carr, almost 30 years ago, I believe, after their daughter, Kristen, passed away from a rare sarcoma. And the foundation raises money for sarcoma research and sarcoma fellows who go out across the country and bring their specialty to areas that are underserved so that people with sarcomas can find the expertise that they need to get the treatment they need and get their questions answered. So, as with all of our panels, we're going to kick things off with some music and a message. This one is from Sid Bullins, who's going to say a few words about Dave Marsh and play a song. And after that, we'll be joined by Laura Anke. So I'm going to share the Sid Bullins video right now.
Hey everybody, my name's Sydney Bullins, formerly Cindy Bullins. I am really honored and privileged to be here as a part of this celebration of Dave Marsh and his work, the Land of Hopes and Dreams. And Dave was part of me and my life regaining my hopes and dreams after the death of my daughter, Jessie. Dave and I had known each other for many years. We've probably known each other for about 40 years now and had been a good acquaintance, but we became friends after the death of my daughter Jessie in 1996 when he called me out of the blue to tell me that he knew what I was going through because of the death of he and Barbara's daughter, Kristen Ann Carr, a few years before. And his reaching out to me, he extended a hand and a heart to me in a way that few people could have because he knew what I was going through. And for all of the perceived gruffness and roughness of Dave Marsh, which I see written all over the place, I have never known anything but sweetness from Dave. So I'm here to pay tribute to his heart, and tearing up talking about it, and his soul. and his compassion and his passion, which is evident in everything he does, whether it's journalistic or political or his opinions, whatever it is. He's passionate. We all know that. But he's also passionate about humanity. And for that, I am forever grateful. Sing a song. And if I cannot cry, this song from my Somewhere Between Heaven and Earth album that came out in 1999, for which Dave wrote the liner notes. And it's a song called I Gotta Believe in Something. I can't figure it out as if I ever could. Everything I planned didn't work out like I thought it would. I've had my share of tragedy. I felt the darkness cover me till I can't see. But I gotta believe in something. I gotta believe in something. Without this just plain nothing don't sit right with me. I gotta hold on to something. I gotta hold on to something. Even if it's nothing but a little dream. Some days just breathing is all that I can do. And I curse the disappearance of everything I knew. There's only so many tears I can cry. I need to point my soul to the light so I can see. And I gotta believe in something. I gotta believe in something. Without this just plain nothing don't sit right with me. I gotta hold on to something. Gotta hold on to something. Well, I can't live with nothing to believe. I can't figure it out as if I ever could. Everything I planned didn't work out like I thought it would. So I gotta believe in something. I gotta believe in something. Well, that is just plain nothing. Don't sit right with me. gotta believe in something. Well, I can't live with nothing to believe. I love you, Dave. Take care.
Hi, I'm Lauren Anke. That was such a beautiful video. We know, for those of you who've been checking out this conference and know Dave, that Dave walks it like he talks it and asks us all to do the same. And so music and activism and really thinking about how we put our ideas into practice is key to what we're trying to do at this conference. And there's maybe no better place or more powerful place where that has happened in Dave's career than around healthcare and justice. And I can think of no better person to lead that conversation than Sue Martinez, who has brought together the worlds of music and justice and health in her daily work and life. Sue's an organizer, writer, and in the words of Nora Guthrie, a conduit for sure. She started her music career as a volunteer and then a board member at the ARC in Ann Arbor. And while housing touring musicians came to understand the realities of touring songwriters' lives, she later formed her own PR agency and did PR and management for scores of musicians, labels, and festivals across North America for almost 20 years. Sue transitioned from the music business to nonprofit safety net healthcare, where she served in various leadership roles. This year, she's been the project lead for the COVID-19 vaccination program in her organization, a huge task. She studied the healthcare system in Cuba as part of a person-to-person exchange and has been a panelist at multiple conferences, including the No More Benefits panel about musicians and healthcare at South by Southwest in 2005, moderated by Dave. Her writing has appeared in multiple publications, including Rock and Rap Confidential and Counterpunch. She's a lifetime member of the Folk Alliance, a member of the American College of Healthcare Execs, Women Healthcare Executives, National Association of Latino Healthcare Executives, and a member of the Institute of Healthcare Improvement. That list, I think, really is a great representative of the way that Sue is taking such an important leadership role. She also holds the secret to getting the real truth from Little Richard and is the absolute finest of friends to share a concert with. I can't imagine a better moderator for this panel that so reflects Dave's best hopes and dreams. So I'll throw it to Sue Martinez.
Wow, thank you so much, Lauren. We have shared some amazing concert and conference experiences together for sure. So I'm one of the co-organizers of this conference, celebrating my friend and mentor, Dave Marsh, and I have had my foot in both the world of music and the music business and in healthcare. And I'm really excited today about today's panel because we get to tell a side of Dave that not everyone knows as well as they should, which is his tireless work, for lack of a better word, as a patient advocate in the fight for healthcare and justice for all. Yesterday, Greil Marcus spoke about how Dave's work in making the world a better place is of a piece with his writing, and that is very true. In fact, Dave has published over 25 books, but one of the most important that he's written is not published, at least in that form. And it's a book about cancer, which he has co-written with Dr. Marie Brennan from Memorial Sloan Kettering, which is where his daughter received care. I have been fortunate enough to read part of that book, which he shared with me during my own experience with cancer. He has very wise words to share, not only for patients who have been diagnosed with a cancer diagnosis, but also for their caregivers and for the providers of care as well. And I think everybody who knows Dave, and certainly if you've heard any of the panels so far in this conference, you know Dave is a fighter for equality, for justice. He's a fighter for civil rights. He's a fighter about whether or not a song is any good. But if you are literally fighting for your life, a friendship with Dave knows no limits. In fact, Dave once threatened to get on a plane and physically stop me from getting a treatment one of my doctors had mentioned because he knew so much about it and he was determined that that was not going to happen to me. So that's just a little snippet of Dave. And when you see how his face lights up at Christmas when he suits up as Santa for the pediatric cancer holiday party at Memorial Sloan Kettering, I think then you really understand one of the main reasons that Dave has fought so hard for a better world. There is nothing, and I mean nothing, in this world that makes Dave happier than putting a smile on a child's face. So I'd like to introduce some friends who I met through Dave and who are friends and colleagues in the same battle to make the world better and more just. I'd like to start by introducing my friend Michael Solomon. Welcome, Michael. Michael is an established entrepreneur and the founder of multiple organizations, including 10X Management, 10X Ascend, Brickwall Management, which is where I met him years ago. We were just talking about meeting at South by Southwest many years ago. Another organization called Musicians on Call, which is very near and dear to my heart. And I will state right up front, I am actually a volunteer with Musicians on Call at UCSF San Francisco Pediatric Campus, and also on the advisory board for the SF chapter. And of course, he's also intricately involved with the Christian Ann Carr Fund, and also has established an organization called We Are All Music Foundation. He's also the author of a terrific book called Game Changer, How to Be 10X in the Talent Economy. I highly recommend it. I use it frequently. And he remains a sought after voice in the business technology world and makes frequent appearances on television, MSNBC, BBC, Bloomberg Television. So welcome, Michael. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
I'm so excited to be here with you. Super.
I'd also like to, another friend of ours is Heidi Schultz-Adams. Heidi has been a passionate patient advocate herself since surviving Ewing's sarcoma in her mid-20s. Heidi's career in advocacy formally began in 2000 when she founded an organization called Planet Cancer, which is a pioneering nonprofit community of support and advocacy for adolescents and young adults with cancer. There's an acronym called AYA for adolescents and young adults, which sarcoma is particularly prone to get adolescents and young adults. Planet Cancer included the first ever online patient community for young people with cancer and was founded with the support of the Christian Ann Carr Foundation. In the following years, she has been at the forefront of an international movement of advocacy organizations, healthcare institutions, and federal agencies working to improve care and treatment for young adults with cancer. She's also written 2 books, which we will be talking about, and won numerous awards for her transformational advocacy in AYA cancer. And today she continues her work through an organization called RX for Good, which is a patient advocacy consulting firm. So thank you, Heidi, for being here.
So great to be here. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. And then I also want to introduce Bobby Muller, who I've only recently met, again through Dave. I'll tell a little bit about Bobby's story if you're not familiar. On April 29th in 1969, Bobby Muller was paralyzed by a shot through the chest while leading an assault on a North Vietnamese held hill. After coming home, he worked with the Vietnam Veterans Against the War organization and served on the board of directors for the Eastern Paralyzed Veterans Association. He then created the Vietnam Veterans of America in 1978. We'll be talking a lot about that organization today. And this organization, along with its sister organization, the Vietnam Veterans of America Foundation, launched fights for proper health care, psychological counseling, Agent Orange assistance, and recognition of the effects of Agent Orange on veterans and their children, psychological counseling, assistance, employment assistance, and a revamped and improved GI Bill of Rights that really reflected, in addition, the needs of Vietnam vets. The work on reconciliation with Vietnam, and they worked on reconciliation with Vietnam and a program to help victims of landmines in Cambodia. And he's one of the 6 organizations that supported that organization, which received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1997. Muller also ran Sports for Peace, a peace studies program in conflict resolution, a nuclear threat reduction campaign, and support organizations for troops from Afghanistan and Iraq. He's also been involved in collaborations with musicians ranging from Emmylou Harris to Bruce Springsteen, Sheryl Crow, Steve Earle, Willie Nelson, and Patty Griffin. So thank you and welcome, Bobby. That's quite a list there. So
I hate to admit that I forgot half of them. So I'll lay claim to being the dinosaur among the group.
Not at all, not at all. So we also have an additional participant, Stuart Frankie, who's going to join us via video later in the panel, but he's very present throughout the conversation, so I want to recognize him up top. And although we're going to be talking about some serious and personal stuff, I just want to emphasize this is not going to be a sad panel. This panel is really tells the story about not dying, which is very different. This is a story about living, and I just want to frame that right up front. So my first question for each of you is really your origin story. How did you first meet Dave Marsh, our man of the hour here? And I'll start with Bobby. If you could tell us how you first met Dave.
What do you think? At a Bruce concert. I came back from Vietnam, and ever since that day, I've been at war with my own government. And I considered myself to be fairly radical. And I was shocked to meet Dave and meet somebody who knew more than I did about a lot of these issues, was even more aware of the subterfuge and the covert actions and the deceptions and the lies, and frankly, the criminality of our government. He was passionate, he was incredibly informed, and he surprised the hell out of me, I gotta say.
And then let's see, let me go also to Heidi. Tell me how you first met Dave.
Oh my gosh. It's funny when I was thinking about this panel and getting ready and sort of thinking about how I met Dave and how I've known Dave, I sort of realized, I was like, I don't think there's any other person who's had such an impact on my life. Like, he literally changed the whole trajectory of my life. But I don't think I realized that until just now, thinking about how he did it, because he's really sneaky. But I met Dave when I was in my late 20s. I was 27. I was literally about 5 minutes out of my own cancer experience. And I had, which had lasted, a good couple of years. And I had moved to Connecticut from Texas to take a job at a trade magazine. And at the time, it was in the 90s, late 90s. And so I had met a friend online, because that's when that was all starting. And I'd sent her some of my writing about my cancer experience, and she forwarded it to Dave and told him I had just moved to Connecticut, which is where he lived. And so one day at work, I get this email, and it said, it was like, "Hi, Heidi. I don't know what you did to deserve cancer in Connecticut and working at a magazine, but I'd really like to meet you and talk more about that." And he's like, "Would you like to come to dinner?" And I was like, oh my gosh, who is this guy? Like, he's inviting me to dinner at his house, he and his wife. And I went, of course, and had dinner with Dave and Barbara and around the kitchen table. And I'm sure we will talk a lot about Dave and his tables, and especially that kitchen table, but magic happens. And he has supported me and mentored me ever since in my writing. Even that night around the table, he made me realize that what I thought was just me being weird about my own cancer experience was really because I was a young person. And I hadn't actually made that connection in my own head until he sort of talked me through it. And then it was like this light bulb went on, and then he just started sharing other things he knew with me. And then that led to, you know, my starting a few years later, starting Planet Cancer, which was a community of support for young people with cancer, because our experiences and our needs were so different. And Dave and the Kristen and Carr funds have provided the seed funding for that. And every major step of the evolution of the young adult cancer movement, Dave was there, you know, behind the scenes, supporting, encouraging, cheerleading, because he saw, he doesn't just see one piece of the puzzle, right? That's Dave. He sees the whole thing. So it was sarcoma research. It was the psychosocial needs of young people with cancer. It was the systems change, you know, and he would come in at key points. Another activity we did a number of years later, was a grand rounds where we travel around. I traveled to cancer centers all around the country and spoke to doctors about my experience with another physician about the data. And that was another lesson I learned from Dave, right? Is like the power of storytelling and how your story can make a difference. So he's been there at every major point of advocacy in my life. He taught me that how to do it. And I didn't realize all that until I was just thinking about it for this panel. And now I'm going to have to go back and talk to him about this.
I'm sorry, I just want to add that I think that Planet Cancer has had some of the best swag I've ever seen, including, I think I still have a pen from you, and the motto is, "We've done drugs Keith Richards never heard of."
Yes, I was very proud of that one.
I use mine very proudly. So, let's see. And then I want to ask Michael also. Your origin story is a little bit different than the rest of ours, but you are really a central person in Dave's life. So I'd love for you to tell us.
So it's kind of fun to go back to the beginning of this, because it really is a long time ago at this point. It's over 30 years. I was a teenager, and I think we can all agree that teenagers are idiots, and you'll hear several of those moments in this story. But I met this beautiful young woman, Kristen. I hear a little bit about her parents being in the music industry. I'm in business school thinking I'm going to be a business person, which I guess I ended up being, and I'm gonna go pick her up at her parents' house and meet the parents, and I'm thinking, and this is starting to become like, it's not just gonna be a one-time thing, like I'm going to be there a bunch. So there I show up in my ripped jeans, being proud to be a college student and not too conservative. But I also come reading the Wall Street Journal very, very publicly while I'm waiting for Kristen in the house, thinking at this point, I'm not sure about liberal, conservative, not even where I stood. I had a better sense of that, but I certainly didn't think of the Wall Street Journal as a political statement. I thought of it as a, look at me, I'm going to be able to take care of your daughter one day. I'm a business person kind of thing. So I'm sitting there reading the Wall Street Journal. It's not until a few days in that I learned that was not the paper of record in this household, nor was I achieving my goal of impressing anyone. If anything, I was actually doing quite damage to my reputation at this moment. But Dave was kind and nice, and it led to the beginnings of what would become endless conversations about politics and the world. And there's something I'm so glad to get to talk about today in front of people and be on the record about. So this is going back 30 years. I can't tell you the number of conversations I've been in the room for with Dave and other people where we all looked at each other away from his gaze, rolling our eyes about radical Dave and, oh, he's just, he's just a little out there. He's a little angry from growing up in Detroit, and he's a little angry from a lot of things that he dealt with growing up, and he's just a little out there politically. So you fast forward 30 years, and I don't think that our eye rolling stopped until very recently. But meanwhile, what I want to say about all of this, about all of his ideas, about all of his diatribes about race and inequality and the ills of marketing and advertising and getting people to want things that they don't need and where this was leading us. Here we are in 2021, and he was fucking right about it all. He really was. It took a long time for some of us to be able to see it. It took a long time for the country to start to get toward the reckoning that we're having. But the guy was so right, and we were all idiots laughing at him. And I just needed to, I have a lot more that I want to say, but I needed to get there on this topic. And you know, the other thing that I'll just say out of the gate is we went as a family, we went through this horrible experience of losing Kristen, and most people after that experience turn away and can't really look back into that world. And Dave and Barbara, but especially Dave, never turned away. He leaned in, and when he saw Heidi, or when he saw Karen Swimer, or he saw anybody else, a mother, a father, a family member who was going through hard times, it was give them my number, have them call me, introduce me by email. And he just approached those people with compassion. And the conversations in the background were Dave saying to me, how do I tell this person that their loved one is going to die? They're sort of thinking that this is, you know, going in a different direction, and I don't know if I should be the one. And just so much weight that he carried in those conversations and the relationships he built. And so many of us, you know, in this room and attending today and in his sphere all fit that bill of people that he leaned into in our very dark times, and shared, you know, deeply of himself to do that. So I'll stop there for now, because I could use all our time, but I won't.
That's an amazing story. That's great. We will definitely be coming back to how whatever all the things that happened after that. I want to go back to Heidi really quickly. So you've written 2 books, Here and Now, which is a beautiful collaboration with photographer Elena Dorfman, who's a phenomenal artist, and another one called Planet Cancer, the frequently bizarre yet always informative experiences and thoughts of your fellow natives, which you co-wrote with your brother. Is that right? But I want to talk about Here and Now. I've actually got a copy here. I just want to do a shameless plug here for this book here. If you can find this, definitely look for it. It's just a gorgeous book. But I want to talk about the inscription. You dedicated this to Dave Marsh and Barbara Carr, who started the whole thing years ago in their kitchen. And you mentioned it a little earlier on, but can you talk about the magic of those conversations? Because, you know, there's so many levels at which Dave really engages changes. He uses every platform he has, whether it's his writing, books, media, being on television, his one-on-one connection, but he also is a conduit in his own right, obviously. And those intimate gatherings where he brings people into his home are also profoundly important. And you've been a part of that. So I'm hoping you can talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, and I'm sure Michael jump in here, but for me, it's pretty obvious. Like for Dave, you know, change is personal. It's all personal, and it's all on behalf of people you love. And that's where it all starts. It's not an intellectual exercise. It's like from here, you know, what Sydney said at the beginning about his heart and his passion, like that's 100%, you know? And I think the kitchen table is just, it's like a metaphor, you know, he brings you in, and he does ply you with wine. I will say that. And that may have a lot to do with it. But, you know, it's just people open up and they talk about their hopes and dreams, and he understands that, and he hears you, and he draws you out. And then if he sees, you know, a way that he can help or support or help you find a path, like that's what he does. You know, he's a master. And so, and I think it's not, you know, it's his kitchen table at his house, but, you know, you are a veteran of Dave's Kitchen, which was our party at South by Southwest every year, where he would just I mean, it was like the freaking Pied Piper, right? He would walk around South by and hand out these little tickets I'd made for him with my address and invite people to my house, because we started this small, intimate gathering because he wanted to, his friends didn't know that he could cook, his Austin friends. So he's like, oh, let's cook for them. And so, that started this, it was a small gathering, and then the next year was a little bigger, and then the next year was a little bigger, and then it became really, really big, and you never knew who was going to show up. But that's where the connections were made, the facilitation, the networking, the friendships over years, you, me, Michael, it's some sort of superpower that he has.
It is. I actually, at some point, I think I bought it for Barbara, but it's a sign that says "Angels Gather Here," and it's one of those signs. It's lovely looking, but it's one of those signs that are now in every gift shop. It's sort of not a handmade. I'm a little ashamed. I was a little ashamed when I bought it, but it was after we collectively lost a second young person in our world, and I just thought at the time that I bought it, I thought about the souls that had departed. That was the angels that I was thinking of. But Heidi, as I listen to you speak, I reframe it. And that sign, by the way, Barbara put it in the kitchen and is over the dining table. And as you speak, I realize that angel is not just those that have gone on. It's all of those who gather in the kitchen and do the work that we do, that these people inspire. And I think it's very fitting that that is there. So I'm glad.
Yeah,
I'm glad
met
that it's put that in the gift pile.
I met Elena at the kitchen table, and then she and I wrote the book, and we had traveled around and met all these other amazing cancer survivors, to tell their stories about survivorship, which was a new thing at that time. It was always, he was always right there at the beginning.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Michael, I want to pivot a little bit to talk about the Kristen Ann Carr Fund. This whole conference, we've been talking about it. We're doing this for free, but we are, we've made a decision to have, really, if anybody would like to make a donation to the fund, the work that's happening is really, really profoundly important, and also, again, speaks to looking at the greater need. My own mother is a sarcoma survivor of many years, and she was misdiagnosed for a long time until she got to Memorial, and her doctor was Dr. Ochoa, who was early legendary figure in sarcoma. And he was the one that convinced her that she didn't need some additional treatment that everybody else was telling her she needed to have. And, this being, on the eve of Mother's Day, I just want to thank him for helping her get the information that she needed to make the right decisions. So she had a nice long life with us. But when I first talked to Dave about the mission of the Kristen Ann Carr Fund, and it wasn't just to have things happen at Memorial, it was like they wanted to send cancer experts and develop fellows that would be all over the country and all over the world, so that you could be in any city near a cancer center and have the same level of information and access. So you were really, on the ground with the formation of that, Michael. Could you tell us a little bit more about how that started and how the fund happened as well?
Yeah. The beginnings of this were really at Kristen's request. She said in the last months of her life that she wanted us to do some work to help ensure other people didn't go through this, especially people who didn't have all the resources that she had at her disposal. And I don't remember the timeline perfectly, but I know that we went through this grieving process, and I feel like before we even picked our heads up, there was a concert organized at MSG, and I know I had a hand in some of it, but I also know that I was not in great shape to be organizing anything. And before we knew it, this was all happening. And Barbara and Dave put this together and put it together so quickly, and there were a lot of other people involved, but the rest of us who have done so much, I don't think were deeply involved in that first event. I think that was sort of the catalyst that got everybody going. And there was over $1 million raised that night, which is astounding for a one-night event and a launch event. It's not like we built up to that. We can do that now on our own which is wonderful. But as a launch event, it was amazing. And the thing that Dave brought to that organization and brings to that organization is the rest of us were able to figure out how to raise money. It's not rocket science to do that part. It's not easy, and it took time and it took a lot of work, and I don't want to diminish anybody involved in that, myself included. But what Dave did virtually single-handedly was he figured out who are the smartest doctors in this field, and how do I partner with them on this, and how do I ask the right questions and get the right advice. And the relationship with Dr. Brennan was crucial, who was Kristen's doctor. And the collaboration between Dave and Murray, and I wasn't in the room for this, but led to the realization that if we train a fellow in sarcoma every year, and then they go out into the world, we've trained them in New York at Memorial under Dr. Brennan, and then they go out into the world, we are going to seed sarcoma experts all over the country and ultimately all over the world. And here we are all these years later, and I think there are 28 people who have experts in sarcoma. It's actually more than that, because that was originally the surgical fellowship. Then we added an oncology fellowship. So we're well over, probably around 40 now, of people who have sarcoma expertise that are sprinkled around North America, because we have some in Canada as well. And what that means is when you have that horrible conversation and somebody says that you have a sarcoma, the second part of that conversation is there are experts 3 hours away, 6 hours away, 5 hours away. It's not you have to fly to New York or you have to fly to Texas. You have choices, and there are also more people who can recognize the symptoms, so that, as people are prone to say about this and rare diseases, when you hear hoofbeats, you know that it's not always a horse. Sometimes it's actually a zebra. And how do you know to listen for maybe this is a zebra? And we've really achieved that goal, and we've saved so many lives, because one of the things that we know about sarcoma is your survival rate is so impacted by how quickly you get to sarcoma expertise, and the number of people who just, if they knew that one piece. I mean, at one point, as I learned this, we spent all this energy getting this messaging right, that was supported by the medical staff at Memorial and in other places, and then get that messaging on sarcoma organizations all over the country. Because if we did one thing, it's just get to a specialist right away. And we've saved a lot of lives with that. We haven't necessarily saved all the lives because we've come up with the magical cure, but we've also saved a lot of quality of life, because we know through some of the work that we've done what doesn't work. So treatments that people went through and suffered through and that ruined their quality of life, that didn't actually improve their lives, are no longer given. And that's a huge win. And there's a lot more advancement here that I'm going to be able to get to right now. And frankly, I don't really want to take that away from Dave. Dave is the one who's best equipped to talk about that.
I think that's, and the concert you're referring to was the Bruce's concert at Madison Square Garden, which really kicked that off. In terms of the funding, many people remember the events, but they don't always hear the story of what the results of the work and the fundraising are, and that's so important to understand. So thank you for sharing that. And Bobby,
can I make one more quick point about, like, I wasn't there for the first event. I was probably in my own cancer treatment at that moment in time, but I came in a couple of years later for the subsequent events, and it was literally grassroots advocacy in action. It was friends, family members, networks coming together to raise money, to raise awareness, and then share it back out. I mean, it was so powerful that especially a bunch of young people can come together and really build something that now is just incredibly powerful. You know, it's a testament.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, the young people really get the credit. We're not young anymore, but we really get the credit for raising the money. But over the years, I mean, I told you about the first step, but over the years, it's always been Dave who has spoken to the right people to figure out what is the right next move, what is the right way to spend our money. I mean, it's a considerable amount of money. We're over $25 million at this point that we've raised and deployed. And it's not, that's not an insignificant thing. And that is a really big job. And he's taken it so seriously and done such an amazing job. I can't think of somebody who could have been a better steward of those dollars than Dave was. I'll shut up.
I want to pivot a little to Bobby here. Bobby, you also, your organization also was saved by a big benefit concert as well. And I'd love for you to talk about how Bruce came into your life and helped you with your organization, which was floundering at the time.
That's to put it mildly. It was at the point that they had given us notice they were going to cut off the phones. We had been given an eviction notice. It was around the 6th time we crashed. I said, that's it. We can't go anymore. And I had a guy in the office named Igor. He was a Marine, Vietnam vet, Tutor, but he was brought up in a Russian-speaking household. So he picks up the phone, says, hey, Bobby, there's this guy wants to talk to you, something about a Bruce Springsteen. So I grabbed the phone, said, Igor, I love you, but you're culturally deficient. And it was John Landau. And he said, Bruce had a continuing concern about what's going on with Vietnam vets. And it seems like you're the guy to talk to when we get together. And I said, sure. And he said, well, we're going to be in Jersey tomorrow night having a concert. Why don't you come on over? So I did. At the end of the show, got to talk to Bruce, gave him my pitch, and he said, let me think about it. Next day, he calls and said, you can come to Los Angeles next week. I said, sure, what's up? He said, I want to do a concert for you, for the Vietnam vets. And I have to tell you, in all honesty, Vietnam was a negative experience for America. People wanted to forget about it. They felt guilty about it, ashamed, you name it. And we, the vets, kind of got pushed off in that direction. And that night, Bruce went on stage, first time, without a guitar, before a concert, to talk to the audience and say, this is why we're doing the concert. I got to tell you a really quick story that he brought me out on stage to say a few words, blah, 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 and gave me the mic. At the end of the concert, he said, you know, Bobby, when you gave me the mic, I didn't know if I could do the concert. What are you talking about? He said, I was so nervous about going in front of an audience without my guitar to talk that I didn't sleep last night at all. But he took us out of the shadows, made us okay. And within 30 days, we had concerts from other stars, Pat Benatar, Charlie Dings. And without Bruce, we would not have had a coherent Vietnam veteran movement and organization. And it was through that that I got to hook up with Dave. And I love listening to this group because I have my own relationship with Dave. But what I'm appreciating is the breadth of what this guy has been doing and what he's been involved in. And I think, you know, along with his intensity, his passion, his intellect, is his incredible generosity. And he's been very generous to me. I remember going back a whole bunch of years now, somebody asked me to write an article about something related to music. I didn't know how to do it. And I just happened to call Dave, and he took the time. And he said, look, put your computer on. And he walked me through how to actually research and put together a story. Nobody had ever done that. I said, that's fantastic. I've been on his radio show a few times, but the other thing that he really did remarkably was help my brother, who started an organization to take young adults that are confined to wheelchairs and bring them down to Grand Cayman and get them certified as scuba divers, where you're liberated from the wheelchair. And my brother had one protege that rolled his own wheelchair, not an electric, manual, across the United States from Los Angeles to New York in 71 days. A phenomenal accomplishment. And Dave was the one that repeatedly had them on the show and promoted the awareness of what was being done. And so know that along with everything else you're talking about, generosity on his part is pretty much at the top of the list.
So just a follow-up question for you, Bobby. In Bruce's, in Dave's biography of Bruce, called the version, I was reading the version called Two Hearts last night. One of the things Dave wrote about that night, that benefit concert in Los Angeles, was what you said in your speech. You said that it was rock and roll that brought people of a generation together, that rock and roll would provide the healing that everyone needed. And you talked about what a divided nation we were. And you talked about how Vietnam vets were being received and how, the traditional veterans organizations did not meet the needs. Can you talk a little bit about that healing power of rock and roll that night and what else it gave you? You had many other, go ahead.
When you go into a void, it's easy to become a leader because you're the only one there. And nobody really wanted to deal with Vietnam. But I spent a year in a veteran's house. I had a mouth. And I said, well, damn it, I'm going to start talking. And I got a lot of media attention and became recognized as the president of an organization, et cetera, et cetera. I had access to the defense contractors, past political leaders, you name it. Nobody would help us, despite the fact that I really had the credentials to speak on behalf of helping the Vietnam vets. And I mean it when I tell you that when Bruce came forward, out of the blue, put that concert together, it turned everything around. Not only did he give us a hell of a lot of money that night, but more importantly, he gave us a good housekeeping seal of approval. And, we were no longer in the shadows. And it was, him, the musicians that followed him. I learned that lesson when we did the Nobel Prize winning landmine campaign. The most substantial thing, I think, was concerts that we put together with the musicians. And, music is an international language. We went different parts of the world. And I don't know, he just, he put it together. It worked phenomenally. And I'll say it, as I've said 100 times, we would not have had what we had for Vietnam vets without Bruce taking that initiative.
Beautiful. Talking about the healing power of music, I want to, again, pivot just a little bit to talk about Musicians on Call, which is a fabulous organization that Michael co-founded. As I mentioned earlier, I'm highly biased. I'm a volunteer with the organization and believed in it from the very first time I heard about it. The concept is really that Musicians on Call brings live performance on a regular basis to patients in hospitals, whether it's pediatric or veteran centers. And it's very, very powerful. So Michael, I want to ask you, what inspired you to create this organization?
So there's a theme in what I'm saying today, and the theme is Dave knew shit and I didn't. So the origin story is Barbara, in the early-ish days of the Chris and Carr Fund, arranged for Wynton Marsalis to play in a recreation room at Memorial Sloan Kettering for patients. I was there that day. I would say there were about 100 people in the room. It was wonderful. It was life-changing. There was a patient who got to play with him at the end of the performance. That was a patient who we were told was terminal, and that was the highlight of his existence. And I was a young artist manager at the time, and I thought, well, I may not be able to get Winton, but I can bring musicians up here and do this. So seemed like a nice idea. Start bringing some of my friends and people that I managed up to that same rec room. There would be between 8 and 15 people. And Vivek Tiwari was there with me this one night where at the end of the performance in the rec room, a staff member came over and said there were 2 patients who were too sick to be wheeled down to this room. They're further down on the floor. Would you be willing to go play a song in their room? And sure enough, we said, of course, and we walked down the hall, and the musician leaves their guitar case in the hall and goes into the room, and we go into the room, and magic ensued. And I mean it in a very kinetic way. It is very easy for me to explain that Musicians on Call takes musicians and they go to the bedsides of patients and they play music at the bedsides of patients. Everybody can picture this. It's not complicated. And you think you get it because it's very simple. And until you actually see it and are in the room, you don't get it. You think you get it. I thought people think they get it all the time. They don't get it. And what happened that night was this kinetic change in the air, such that we were so inspired. And the story of this particular room was a horrible situation. The patient, who was an adolescent, had just been told they were having a limb amputated the next day. The family was from Greece. They didn't speak a word of English. There was no way to communicate. It was even hard to explain that somebody was there to play music. And the musician played, if I remember correctly, All You Need Is Love. And because it was so universal, you felt the energy in the room change. I felt they went from a hopeless, horrible place in that one moment, in that span of a song, to this is horrible, but life is going to be okay. There is a future. There's joy again. There will be joy again. And we went home and wrote a business plan that night, literally that night. Vivek and I. And so getting back to sort of where Dave fits into this, after doing this for a little while and starting to realize this is a really big opportunity, I went to Dave to talk about how the Kristen Ann Carr Fund could help support this. And this was in my mind part of the Kristen Ann Carr Fund. I mean, this came out of Barbara doing it. I had no designs at this moment on another organization, just a new project. And Dave said, this is great. He was very supportive, and this needs to be its own organization. This is going to be bigger than the Kristen Ann Carr Fund and not doesn't belong under it. This really, needs its own wings and to fly. And I'll tell you, and I don't know if I ever told this to Dave, I understood what he was saying. And I also, and the Kristen Ann Carr Fund will support you and help you get it off the ground. So it wasn't a rejection. It was just sort of a repositioning. And I don't know if I ever told Dave this, but I definitely walked out of the room swallowing a little bit hard, feeling like that was a little bit of a rejection. It was rejection with all the kinds of support that anybody could ask for, but it was a little bit of a rejection. Again, here we are, Musicians on Call is now 21 years old, and all of a sudden, it's very clear to me that he was totally right. It needed to be its own thing. It is its own thing. It's got a staff of 20 people. It's the largest provider of music into healthcare facilities, at least in the country, probably in the world. And by the way, the support to get going was all through Barbara and Dave and John and Bruce. And the support to keep going has always been there. And we can definitely stand very healthily on our own 2 feet now. But we would never be here without that conversation, without his vision in that moment. And enough said.
Well, I just want to say you and Dave and Barbara and everybody involved with MOC, you're the last people I saw before the pandemic hit when I flew to New York for the 20th anniversary. That was my last trip before the pandemic hit. So I'm so glad I made that trip for additional reasons.
I am so glad you were there, and I'm so glad that event got to happen, and that was definitely a very big highlight in my time.
Yeah, very much. And I just want to add, there are a lot of clinical studies happening around the neurologic healing power of music. It's not just emotional healing. There is real science behind what happens with with music and brain and neurons reconnecting. Our hospital has music therapists that work with the clinical team to help patients with that healing. I've seen those miracle stories. And as a volunteer with MOC, I've also seen the effect that the visits have on the family that's there. You know, there's not enough appreciation for all that the family and the caregivers give when somebody is hospitalized or seriously ill. There's a lot more that needs to happen to support them in hospitalization and at home as well during the caregiving. But I've seen that part of the story as well. So I have,
Sorry.
yeah, please.
I was just gonna say, like, that's, again, that sort of speaks to Dave's ability to see the whole picture, right? The whole person. Like, people need good science. They need access to good experts and doctors. They need to be able to get to the place where they're going to receive care, but they also need emotional nourishment. They also need their psychosocial needs met. For young people, they need someone to talk to them about fertility. They need to connect with their peers. Like, he saw the whole thing and was, you know, always is able to toss a seed or figure out how do we, you know, connect all the parts of this ecosystem. You know, it's finding the levers for change, but also understanding how all the needs fit together as well too.
Yeah, very much. So we're talking about, you know, change, systemic change, structural change. And Heidi and I were having a conversation the other day, and we were talking about Dave's amazing ability to see the world systemically, but also, you know, in seeing those systems of change, really understanding where those leverage points are, where we can be most effective at the local level and certainly at the larger level. And so my question for each of you is, from where you sit with the systems that you are working with right now, what is the change that you need to see, and where are those leverage points where we can be effective?
Who was that directed to?
To all of you. So I'll start with Bobby. I'll start with Bobby.
Big question.
Don't start with me, because I think guns. You know, when I say I've been at war with my government since I came back from Vietnam and realized just what our government does and lies and everything, you know, it's passing the baton to a younger generation that has their lives literally on the line if we don't profoundly and fundamentally change the way we're operating. The younger people are not going to reach at the age that we are, or be in the shape that we have the privilege of being at our age. So get the young involved. You know, the generosity of Dave, but also the breadth of his involvement. It was continuous and continues, and it's a life commitment. And I think our lives are online, whether all of us know it or not. It is, and that's what we need. His example of nonstop advocacy, of being informed, of connecting people. A lot of it is emotion, which is where your music comes in. I want to say one last thing. I got to go back. You know, when I mentioned that Bruce had done so much for the Vietnam vet, he also did it for Iraq and Afghan vets. And, you know, when he would do concerts in DC, where I am, he'd bring people from Walter Reed, et cetera. And I got to tell you, there was one guy, a quadrilateral amputee, you know, amputated above the knees on both legs, above the elbow on both arms. And I'd never seen somebody so sad out of all the people. And Bruce went over and talked to him, you know, and I'm saying to myself, what do you say to a guy like that? You know, but he managed to do it. The guy was sitting kind of like next to me during the concert, and As we got into the concert, the saddest guy I ever saw in my life, he was flapping his lips and going all over the place and rocking in his chair. I said, there you go. There you go. All right. That's it.
Absolutely. Heidi.
I mean, I'll start, but I don't know that I feel qualified to answer that big of a question, really. I mean, I think just because I've come at this problem in a few different ways, and granted for small, niche populations, right? But I think, after doing this for a number of years, you start at the very beginning. It was, and even thinking about what Dave has done and how he approached everything, it's, to work within the system and identify the levers in the system that you can affect, whether that's physician education, patient awareness, supporting patient advocacy groups, bringing people together. I think always is bringing people together and groups together and organizations together to create change. One thing that happened in the young adult space was, I had my own small nonprofit that I had started, and then started finding others. And as we found each other, we came together and we built a coalition. And it was young adult cancer organizations and cancer centers and federal agencies. The NCI had representation there. People, everyone sort of came together around this issue of young people. And I think we got to a point where there was a certain level of, and of course, Dave and the Kristen and Carr Fund supported this work as well. It was the national movement to really raise awareness about young people and their needs and their issues. But at a certain point, you institutionalize as much of that as you can. You get to a point where people understand AYA is a thing, and that's, we need to have some programs for that in our institution. But then sometimes that goes so far and that's all you can do. And then you sort of realize that the system you're operating within is broken. And that's a whole different answer and a whole different approach that's needed to fix a broken system. I think just looking at what's happened with COVID and the pandemic, I think, everyone would acknowledge, and it's been written about, that, the flaws in our healthcare system have just been exposed to the nth degree. We all can see, like, wow, this is not working. And there's a lot of us working in healthcare who've seen that for a long time. The lack of access to therapies, the lack of access to cutting edge therapies, and the best care. It's in many ways unconscionable. And I think perhaps it's an opportunity in the moment when there's such a light shining on it for people to actually stand up and say, okay, yeah, it's broken and we got to fix it. I have hope, but, and there are, I'm sure, people who are a lot closer to working on solutions than I am at this point. But I think if there's one thing I've learned from working with Dave and the work over the years, that one person and joining with other people can make a big difference. And so I think it's up to all of us to really take that responsibility and look in our own communities and, vote and write your Congress people and your senators and that's the we have to do something.
I think I agree. This year, I hope, has made clear for more people that as a society and as people in the world, we are only as well off as our least cared for members. And there's nothing like a pandemic to drive that home. There's the medical side of it. There's the economic side of it. We have to do better. We have the resources. We have to do better with where they go and how smart we are about it. Absolutely.
Yep.
Michael.
I want to add to that what we saw this year is that when people get involved in huge ways, change can happen. And this wasn't the first time that people leaned in the way they did, but it was maybe the first time that the catalysts were much more universal, and that's partly related to technology and media that exists so that everybody could see certain videos and see certain protests and understand, and the movement took hold in a very broad way. And I don't think grassroots work solves all the problems by any stretch. But, another thing that happened this year, which was another Dave being right, is seeing how powerful grassroots work can be. And when we can attribute the results of the election to what happened in Georgia, which was, catalyzed by Stacey Abrams and the people that she worked with, that a relatively small group of people, probably starting with one individual, actually impacted the entire shape of policy that's being created today. That's a very powerful message. And I think the other thing that needs to get added to this conversation, and I hope I'm not completely biased because I have a 17-year-old social justice warrior in my house, at least for another 3 months, but I do believe Gen Z, and it's probably purely out of necessity because they will not live out their lives if they don't fix the world. It's the first generation that is not going to get to a natural old age without having to make change. That generation gives me a lot of hope. Millennials, not to pick on any millennials who are listening or watch this later, that generation didn't lean in that direction. And the fear, the anxiety, the anxious person in me says, oh yeah, these kids are really idealistic because they're young. But then I think about, they don't have a choice. If they don't fix it, they're literally going to die in huge, huge, huge numbers. So that's a lot of incentive. We've never had that kind of incentive before. We've had a lot of justice as an incentive, and certainly some of the justice issues are life and death. But this is like COVID, where it's not just this group or that group. They're all screwed if they don't fix it. I won't be around for when these problems reach, I'll work to fix it because I love my kids, and I presumably will love grandkids if I have them. But from an existential standpoint, they got a lot on their plate that they have to get through. And it feels like, from what I've seen and what I saw during protests this year, that age group is putting on their armor and they're getting ready. And what I see in them is the same radical people that Dave was, except that now they're becoming the norm, and they're becoming the not the exception, but the rule. As opposed to when Dave was like, who's that crazy guy who's ranting about this stuff? Now there's a whole generation of people talking about these issues, and it's pretty exciting.
I think when it becomes personal, it really is a difference, right? Even this year, I think, unfortunately, so many more people experience the personal impact of our broken systems. I talked to advocacy or patient support organizations who are like, we've seen the people who were just barely getting by, or even better than getting by, and now they're lining up at the food banks. There's so many more people experience firsthand, and it's a shame that something like that has to happen. It has to get to that extent for people to realize that things are broken. But maybe with the increased level of awareness and energy from a new generation, it's an opportunity that we can capitalize on.
Yeah, and I just want to call out that for many people, this has always been the case. If you're Black or you're brown or Indigenous, this is not new. This is how it has. This is how the system has been. It's for white people, but this is, for many of them, it's a newer thing. But that's that opportunity to build bridges and start that systemic change. So you were just talking so beautifully about your children, Michael. I want to just say one of our other participants today is Stuart Frankie, who Dave has called the greatest blue-eyed soul singer. Stuart's a musician, a writer. He's got a wonderful book called Between the Ground and God, which is a collection of essays and writings he's done, including for the Detroit Metro Times. He's received numerous ASCAP and Detroit Music Awards and a Point of Light Award for his work in cancer support. I was looking through old issues of Rock and Rap Confidential this last week, and I was reflecting on, among other things, how peppered they are with announcements of musicians who, had a medical crisis and needed, had started a fund or a GoFundMe or something to raise money for their health care. And that's why, when Dave had his panels at South by Southwest, we called it No More Benefits, because, we were just doing benefits all the time to raise funds for basic healthcare needs for musicians and others. And one of the issues had a call for help for when Stu was diagnosed with leukemia and had set up a fund because he needed support. And he survived leukemia. He survived a bone marrow transplant, countless life-threatening effects of his treatments. And more recently, he has suffered a stroke before the pandemic. He is recovering from that. It's been a very long haul, but he did ask us to share this video, which we're going to put up in just a second. The clip that you're about to see was taken about 2 weeks before his stroke. And while he isn't quite up to speaking on the panel, towards the end of the video, I'm going to read some words that he wanted to make sure to send out in tribute to Dave. So let's go ahead and take a look at that video, and then I will read some of Stu's words.
What don't cancer patients want to hear? Well, I was gonna have a t-shirt made up that said, "Fine, how the fuck are you?" Because you get a little tired of, "How are you?" That sort of overtly emotional, "How are you? Oh, how are you?" You get a little tired of that. But everybody means so well. Everybody means so well that you just say, and I always tried to be honest. Here's where I am, here's what's going on. And the one I really can't take, and the one that really angers me is kick cancer's ass. You're gonna kick cancer's ass. No, I'm not. Cancer kicked my ass. It kicked my ass all over the field, man. So I don't like that one at all. The cancer fight is overdone. The whole notion of the cancer fight. It is a fight to some extent, and it's really a fight for your life. There's no doubt. Well, I guess it is a fight. It is very much a struggle, but I look at it more in a sort of a philosophical way, in that it's a profound struggle. It's a struggle between life and death in a way. And you're the protagonist for life, and death is just whatever it wants to be. No, cancer is the protagonist for death. And it is a struggle. It's just a mean struggle. Here's what we're learning about when people say to me, what do you think caused your leukemia? I say, the air. What else? The water. What else? The food. It's like, what doesn't now? We are the first generation. I was born in 1958. We're the first generation that came up with all these different food additives and food preservatives, and we're paying the price. And we're putting fertilizer on our lawn. Why put fertilizer on your lawn? You can have wildflowers right in front of you. You're gonna have, it's crazy. Why add to the degradation of the earth? I don't get it, but we do it. Golf courses do it, football fields do it, everybody does it because they want nice grass. It's a goddamn ground cover, please. And it causes cancer. So when I say the air, the water, the food, it's kind of what doesn't. What doesn't? When I first got to the bone marrow transplant floor at Carmanos, it was called 10 Green then, and I wrote a song called Letter from 10 Green, which was to my own children. Should I not live through this? Just some general rules for living. but it was still mixed with adults and children at that point. And right after I got there, they sent all the children over to Children's Hospital, and it was all adults up there. But one of the first nights I was there, and I was traumatized just being there to begin with, next door to me, a little girl passed away. And in the middle of the night, hearing the sounds of her parents, the cries and just the guttural yells and the footsteps outside my door going back and forth so frantically, and it was just such a scary, overwhelming thing, and that's what prompted me to write the letter home to my own children. And then I always felt that I was glad I got cancer, because maybe I took the bullet in place of one of my kids. How many times can lightning strike one family? There's no guarantee of anything, I know that. It could strike 10 times for all that, I know. But I always felt that sort of maybe, not sacrifice, that's too, it's too ridiculous. But I just felt like if I got cancer, maybe it would keep it away from my own children.
In this wasteland.
So in the late spring of 1998, Dave Marsh was not yet among my closest friends. He was more of a wise and gracious mentor, an older brother of sorts, and the smartest and most compassionate cat I knew. I'd been a fan of his writing since I was a teenager, and had received a letter from him on Christmas Eve of 1990 before we knew each other at all that validated my own songwriting and musical pursuit as something worthwhile and valuable. It was an incredible document of support at a vulnerable time in my career. Little did we know divine order would put us together for another reason. In May of '98, while stretching to go running, I felt an oblong, doughy lump on the left side of my stomach just beneath my rib cage. Spring became summer when I found myself at Beaumont Hospital. The resident physician was young and very direct. An hour later, he came back looking a little older, pale, and drained. Your white blood cell count is 128,000, he said. Normal is about 4,000 to 5,000. It could be infection, but it's likely leukemia or lymphoma. The soul-crushing fear enveloped me as I made my way home. I sat in my studio trying to make sense of what had just happened. How could I tell my wife, Julia, my parents, and the worst, most basic fear filled my soul. My 2 children might grow up without a father. I put down my guitar and called Dave. What I needed was simple, the words I could say to Julia. I didn't possess them, and I didn't even know where to look for them. I needed hope, although hope suddenly meant something very different than it ever had. I needed information. I needed any kind of distant light in the darkness. Dave didn't just give me what I needed, he helped me find it in myself. On that afternoon, our talk led me to a way to proceed, a way to give belief in belief, when I simply was looking for the next step, breath, or thought. On that fateful day, Dave and I talked for a long time, maybe the most crucial phone call of my life. Most importantly, he told me to get to an approved comprehensive cancer center. The rest of the story, complex and circuitous, led me through a bone marrow transplant and onto a life that looked very different than expected, but with a newfound purpose. Dave Marsh continues to be a dear friend and mentor. I will be eternally grateful to him, and it's safe to say that I'm one of thousands of souls Dave has touched in his lifetime. Thank you, Dave. I love you, brother. And so that's a tribute from Stu Frankie for Dave. And just before we take any questions, I just want to read something I found yesterday in an envelope that Dave sent me around 1996 when I met him. It contained the program from Kirsten's memorial service and copies of all the eulogies that were written and tributes and obituaries. And it also contained this memorial that Dave wrote in issue 104 of RRC in winter of '93. And he said, I need to eulogize Kristen Ann Carr because her death means I'll never write about music in the same way. Not only because my family and I have gone through such a soul-shattering experience, but because Kristen helped determine how I listen to music. She made me hear stuff I might have dismissed. And I mean, she made me. She'd lecture me about it. In this way, she wasn't my stepdaughter, but a true child of my heart. Kristen also belongs here because, however you may have received these past 10 years in RRC of ranting and raving, I've seen Rock and Rap Confidential as an espousal of life against death. After watching my own child wage that struggle in literal terms, I know there's a way to live that message to your final breath. You do it by choosing the spirit of hope and affirmation. And so I just want to thank everybody for everything that you're doing, and for Dave for mentoring us on our journeys fighting to make this a better world. And I think we're ready for questions if we've got time, Danny. If there are any questions, we might be at our end of time.
We're close to the end of time. We had about 4, and I boiled them down to 2, and I think I can turn the 2 into 1.
All right.
but I first want to say, I'm a little, just because I think that's about how much time we have. I got a little emotional during that, and I just feel like I need to kind of share this. That when my father was diagnosed with leukemia, it was very similar to what happened with Stu, which he was told he wasn't going to survive, and then he ended up living 12 more years. He got Gleevec, and he had to petition several times for that. But the thing is, Dave sent me his cancer book. Stu got on the phone with me and talked to me all through that time, you know, that long night at the hospital the next day. I mean, these guys, I mean, that starts with this sort of model of how Dave approaches things. But, you know, Stu carries that forward, and it's beautiful. Anyway, so you all have been touching on what the questions have been about. In various ways, in the way you're bringing in youth, and you're talking about the social justice issues connected. But let me just try to sort of, we had someone post to change.org about COVID relief in India. And we had another ask about the connection between Agent Orange and its multi-generational impact on the children of veterans. And this was leading this questioner to think about Heidi's work with young people. And so I was just wondering if we could just sort of throw this out all tied together. Do we have any further thoughts on how we might connect with young people's increasing global awareness around health and justice issues? And perhaps specifically, and this was a whole other question, but I think we can put it together, universal health care. Any thoughts?
I think
oh, go ahead, Michael.
I was just going to say, as it relates to young people, I think we should give them whatever wisdom we've amassed and get the hell out of the way, because we haven't figured it out. So we don't actually have that much to share. So maybe they can avoid some of the mistakes we've made and our failings, and then they can go figure out something to do. And we should not think that we're going to teach them how to fix things, because we don't know how to fix things.
That's just what I was going to say.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Good. Heidi, do you have anything?
I agree with that 1,000%, you know, and having been, I also think they bring a new energy and new perspective and new solutions. You know, there's a lot of us who maybe are tired. And I hate to say that, but you bang your head against a brick wall for so long, and then you want, you know, maybe these young people can just come in and like, let's just, as Michael said, let's get out of the way and let them do it. I think, but I do think, you know, just the principles of grassroots, you know, advocacy come into play. It starts local. It starts people connecting with people, and then groups connecting with groups, and then you build a movement in that way. And I think, you know, there is a movement for healthcare for all. There is, you know, greater acknowledgement that the current system is absolutely broken. And, you know, so if we can get those two forces working at the same time, maybe we have a shot.
Yeah. And Bobby, you were sort of noted in that with the reference to Agent Orange and its multi-generational effect, which reaches down to you. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Look, we didn't get, I think in the early 90s, we're finally America's Vietnam veterans were given some compensation. And it was really not on the science, which was on our side, but the pressure on the chemical companies and the negative PR that forced them to try to stop it. And we came to an out-of-court settlement that moved the needle. And it actually did go to the National Academy of Sciences to tell the Veterans Administration what the consequences can be with linkages between the toxic element of dioxin and this broadening variety of diseases. I'll tell you that when I made that first trip to Vietnam in '81, I met with a guy who was known as the People's Doctor, Dr. Tun Tat Tung, and he'd been Ho Chi Minh's doctor. And if there was one thing the Vietnamese were good at, it was record keeping. And he did this incredible study of soldiers that went down to the South in Vietnam and were exposed to Agent Orange, compared their health records with those that hadn't gone down. And it was a stunning contrast. But what his concern was primarily was, what is the genetic impact on future generations of these toxic elements that have so affected the living? And as it turned out, we've seen this horrible legacy of children with deformities and things like that. I want to go back to something that was said before. No, I don't think you can tell young people what to do. I think you can tell them what you did, what your experience was, give them some thoughts about that and maybe some options to consider. But Michael might be a little optimistic to think that this is going to happen after he's gone. It's happening already. So, you know, it's here, it's now. When you're young, you have this sense of being immortal, right? For a lot of people, myself included, the sense of my own mortality was driven home dramatically, and it changes your life. These kids, I think a lot of them are smarter than we ever were. Technologies are advancing so rapidly that if I had to pick a word to describe our era, it would be exponential. So, you know, if you pay attention, you see what's happening, and it's happening faster and faster. And as that spreads, it will inevitably bring more and more people to the realization that this is a now issue. We got to do it. This is all out, you know, and those that are in our way, knock them down. Sorry. My non-violence stuff. Peace or I'll kill you. Yeah.
No, it's a great point. It's knocking them down for their own benefit.
Yeah. Get them out of the way.
Thank you so much. I just want to, I know we're out of time. I just want to thank everyone for your time today. And this has been an amazing discussion. And
Yes.
Thank you, Dave, for inspiring us all and helping us to really make some large change in the world. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to Mark.
Can I shout out to all the organizers? I had nothing to do with organizing. All I've done is shown up here for this panel, but I am so blown away and astounded, and it's such an act of love and respect and kindness. And I'm so impressed and amazed. So I just needed to get that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. This has been amazing. Before we sign off, you know, tomorrow's Mother's Day. And I have to say, 17 years ago, my mother-in-law was diagnosed with a sarcoma, and Dave was there. Dave was on the phone with me immediately, told me to have my mom, my mother-in-law, get in touch. She did. You know, Dave's done that for hundreds of people on this panel. Mary Beth Schumacher didn't make it, but she maybe made it longer than she would have had Dave not gotten in touch. And, even if that wasn't the case, I just, for all the hope that Dave brings and all the hope that we all try to bring, there are lots of folks who didn't make it. And happy Mother's Day, Mary Beth. Happy Mother's Day, Barbara Carr. We love you. We love Dave. And that's going to wrap it up. Thank you so much.